Section 17 of Celebrated Travels and Travelers, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Rose. Celebrated Travels and Travelers, Volume 2. Great Navigators of the 18th Century by Jules Verne. First part, Chapter 4, Part 1. Captain Cook's Second Voyage, 1c. Cook directed his course to Huaheine Island, which was only 25 leagues distant, and anchored there at 3 in the morning. The natives brought quantities of large fowls, which were the more acceptable, as it had been impossible to obtain any at Tahiti. Pigs, dogs, and fruit were in the market, and were exchanged for hatchets, nails, and glassware. This island, like Tahiti, showed traces of earlier volcanic eruptions, and the summit of one of its hills resembled a crater. The appearance of the country is similar to that of Tahiti, but is on a smaller scale, for Huaheine is only 7 or 8 leagues in circumference. Cook went to see his old friend Orea. The king, dispensing with all ceremony, threw himself on the captain's neck and shed tears of joy. Then he presented him to his friends, to whom the captain gave presents. The king offered Cook all his most precious possessions, for he looked upon this man as a father. Orea promised to supply the English with all they needed, and most loyally kept his word. However, on the morning of the 6th, the sailors who presided over the traffic were insulted by a native covered with red, in war dress and holding a club, who threatened every one. Cook, landing at this moment, threw himself on the native, struggled with him, and finally possessed himself of the weapon, which he broke. The same day another incident occurred. Sparrman had imprudently penetrated to the interior of the island to make botanical researches. Some natives, taking advantage of the moment when he was examining a plant, snatched a dagger, which was the only weapon he carried, from his belt, gave him a blow on the head, and rushing upon him, tore some of his clothes. Sparrman, however, managed to rise and run toward the shore, but, hampered by the bushes and briars, he was captured by the natives, who cut his hands to possess themselves of his shirt, the sleeves of which were buttoned, until he tore the wristbands with his teeth. Others of the natives, seeing him naked and half dead, gave him their clothes, and conducted him to the market-place, where there was a crowd assembled. When Sparrman appeared in this plight, they all took flight without waiting to be told. Cook at first thought they intended to commit a theft. Undeceived by the appearance of the naturalist, he recalled the other natives, assured them that he would not revenge it upon the innocent, and carried his complaint straight to Orea. The latter, miserable and furious at what had occurred, loaded his people with vehement reproaches, and promised to do all in his power to find out the robbers and the stolen things. In spite of the prayers of the natives, the king embarked in the captain's vessel, and entered upon a search for the culprits with him. The latter had removed their clothes, and for a while it was impossible to recognize them. Orea therefore accompanied Cook on board, dined with him, and on his return to land was received by his people, who had not expected his return, with lively expressions of joy. One of the most agreeable reflections suggested by this voyage, says Forster, is that instead of finding the inhabitants of this island plunged in voluptuousness, as had been falsely affirmed by earlier navigators, we remark the most humane and delicate sentiments among them. There are vicious characters in every society, but we could count 50 more sinners in England or any other civilized country than in these islands. As the vessels were putting off, Orea came to announce that the robbers were taken, and to invite Cook to land and assist in their punishment. It was impossible. The king accompanied Cook half a league on his way, and left him with friendly farewells. This stay in port had been very productive. The 2 vessels brought away more than 300 pigs, and quantities of fowl and fruits. Probably they would not have procured much more, even had their stay been prolonged. Captain Furneaux had agreed to take a young man named Omai on board. His conduct and intelligence gave a favourable idea of the inhabitants of the Society Islands. Upon his arrival in England, this Tahitian was presented to the king by Earl Sandwich, First Lord of the Admiralty. At the same time he found protectors and friends in Banks and Solander. They arranged a friendly reception for him among the first families of Great Britain. He lived 2 years in this country, and upon Cook's third voyage he accompanied him and returned to his native land. The captain afterwards visited Ulietea, where the natives gave him the most appreciative welcome. They inquired with interest about Tupia and the English they had seen in the Endeavour. King Oreo hastened to renew his acquaintance with the captain, and gave him all the provisions his island produced. During their stay, Poreo, who had embarked in the Resolution, landed with a young Tahitan girl, who had enchanted him, and would not return on board. He was replaced by a young man of 17 or 18 years of age, a native of Bolabola, named Oedidi, who announced his wish to go to England. The grief evinced by this native on leaving his native land spoke well for his good heart. The vessels, laden with more than 400 pigs, and also with fowls and fruit, left the Society Islands on the 17th of September and steered for the west. 6 days later, one of the Harvey Islands was sighted, and on the 1st of October anchor was cast off Eoa, called Middleburg Island by Tasman and Cook. The welcome by the natives was cordial. A chief named Taiwan came on board, touched the captain's nose with a pinch of pepper, and sat down without speaking. The alliance was concluded and ratified by the gift of a few trifles. Taiwan guided the English into the interior. The newcomers were surrounded by a dense crowd of natives, offering stuffs and mats in exchange for nails, as long as the walk lasted. The natives often even carried their liberality so far as to decline any return for these presents. Taiwan conducted his new friends to his dwelling, agreeably situated in a beautiful valley, in the shade of some sadhecks. He served them with a liquor extracted from the juice of the ayava, the use of which is common to the Polynesian islanders. It was prepared in the following manner. Pieces of a root, a species of pepper, were first chewed and then placed in a large wooden vase, over which water was poured. As soon as this liquor was drinkable, the natives poured it out into cups made of green leaves, shaped into form, and holding about half a pint. Cook was the only one who tasted it. The method of preparing the liquor had quenched the thirst of his companion, but the natives were not fastidious, and the vase was soon emptied. The English afterwards visited several plantations or gardens, separated by intertwined hedges, which were connected by doors formed of planks, and hung upon hinges. The perfection of culture and the fully developed instinct of property showed a degree of civilization superior to that of Tahiti. In spite of the reception he met with, Cook, who could procure neither pigs nor fowls, left this island to reach that of Amsterdam, called Tonga Tabou by the natives. Here he hoped to find the provisions he needed. The vessel soon anchored in the roadstead of Van Diemen, in 18 fathoms of water, a cable's length from the breakers which border the shore. The natives were friendly, and brought stuffs, mats, implements, arms, ornaments, and soon afterwards pigs and fowls. Oedidi bought some red feathers of them with much delight, declaring they would have a high value at Tahiti. Cook landed with a native named Atago, who had attached himself to him at once. During his excursion, he remarked a temple similar to a marae, which was called by the generic name of Faitoka. Raised upon an artificial butt, 16 or 18 feet from the ground, the temple was in an oblong form, and was reached by 2 stone staircases. Built like the homes of the natives, with posts and joists, it was covered with palm leaves. 2 wooden images, coarsely carved 2 feet in length, occupied the corners. "As I did not wish to offend either them or their gods," says the captain, "I dared not touch them, but I inquired of Atago if these were Etuas or gods. I do not know if he understood me, but he instantly handled them, and turned them over as roughly as if he had merely touched a bit of wood, which convinced me that they did not represent a divine being. A few thefts were perpetrated, but they did not interrupt cordiality, and a quantity of provisions were procured. Before leaving, the captain had an interview with a person who was treated with extraordinary respect, to whom all the natives accorded the rank of king. Cook says, "I found him seated with a gravity of deportment so stupid and so dull, that in spite of all they had told me, I took him for an idiot, whom the people adored from superstitious motives. I saluted him and talked to him, but he made no reply, and paid no attention to me. I was about to leave him, when a native made me understand that it was without doubt the king. I offered him a shirt, a hatchet, a piece of red stuff, a looking-glass, some nails, medals, and glassware. He received them, or rather allowed them to be placed upon his person or beside him, losing nothing of his gravity, and speaking no word, not even moving his head to the right or left. However, next day this chief sent baskets of bananas and a roast pig, saying that it was a present from the Ariki of the island to the Ariki of the ship." Cook called this archipelago the Friendly Islands. They had formerly received various names from Schouten and Tasman, as Cocoanut Islands, Traitor Islands, Hope Islands, and Horn Islands. Cook, not having been able to obtain fresh water, was obliged to leave Tonga sooner than he wished. He found time, however, to make a few observations as to the productions of the country and the manners of the natives. We will mention the most striking. Nature had showered its treasures with a liberal hand upon Tonga and the Oa Islands. Cocoa nuts, palm trees, breadfruit trees, yams, and sugar canes are most plentiful there. As for edible animals, pigs and fowls alone were met with, but dogs, if not existing there, are known by name. The most delicate fish abounds on the coast. Of much the same form as Europeans, and equally white, the inhabitants of these islands are well proportioned and of pleasant features. Their hair is originally black, but they are in the habit of tinting it with powder, so that white, red, and blue hair abounds, which produces a singular effect. Tattooing is a universal practice. Their clothes are very simple, consisting of one piece of stuff rolled around the waist and falling to the knees. The women, who at Tonga as everywhere else are more coquettish than men, make aprons of cocoa-nut fibres, which they ornament with shells and bits of coloured stuffs and feathers. The natives have some singular customs, which the English had not noticed before. Thus they put everything that is given them on their heads, and conclude a bargain with this practice. When a friend or relation dies, they slash their limbs, and even some of their fingers. Their dwellings are not collected in villages, but are separate, and dispersed among the plantations. Built in the same style as those of the Society Islands, they differ from them only in being raised higher above the ground. The Adventure and Resolution sailed on the 7th of October, and the following day reconnoitred Pilestart Island, discovered by Tasman. On the 21st, anchor was cast in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. Cook landed a certain number of animals, which he wished to acclimatize, and set sail again to enter Queen Charlotte's Sound, but being caught in a great gale, he was separated from the Adventure, and did not meet her again until he reached England. On the 5th of November, the captain repaired the damages of his vessel, and before undertaking a new voyage in the southern seas, he wished to ascertain the extent and quality of his provisions. He reckoned that 4,500 pounds of biscuits had been entirely spoiled, and that more than 3,000 pounds were in scarcely better condition. During his stay here he obtained a new and still more convincing proof of the cannibalism of the natives of New Zealand. An officer had brought the head of a young man, who had been killed and eaten, and some natives seeing it wished very much for a piece. Cook gave it to them, and the avidity with which they threw themselves upon this revolting food proved the pleasure that these cannibals took in eating food which they have difficulty in procuring. The Resolution left New Zealand on the 26th of November, and entered the glacial regions which she had already traversed. But the circumstances attending her second voyage were distressing. The crew, though in good health, were overcome by fatigue and less capable of resisting illness, the more so that they had no fresh food on board. The Resolution had lost her consort, and the world was convinced that no Antarctic continent existed. It was, so to say, a Platonic voyage. It was necessary to prove beyond the possibility of doubt that no new land of any importance was to be discovered in these latitudes. The first ice was encountered on the 12th of December, and farther to the south than in the preceding year. From this date the usual incidents of navigation in these latitudes were repeated day by day. Oedidee was quite astonished by the "white rain," as he called the snow which fell on his hand, but the sight of the first ice was still a greater marvel to him. He called it "white earth." His mind had been struck by a phenomenon in the torrid zone, says the narrative. As long as the ships remained in these latitudes, we had scarcely any night, and he had seen that we could write at midnight by the light of the sun. Oedidee could scarcely believe his eyes, and he assured us that his fellow countrymen would put him down as a liar if he talked to them of petrified rain and a perpetual day. The young Tahitan had time to become accustomed to this phenomenon, for the ship advanced as far as 76 degrees south, amidst floating ice. Then, convinced that if a continent existed the ice made access to it impossible, Cook determined to proceed to the north. General dissatisfaction prevailed. No one on board was free from severe colds or from an attack of scurvy. The captain himself was seriously affected by bilious sickness, which kept him in bed. For 8 days his life was in danger, and his recovery was likely to be equally painful and slow. The same route was followed until the 11th of March, when with the rising of the sun the joyful cry of "Land! Land!" arose. It was the Easter Island of Roggewein's Davis Land. Upon nearing it the navigators were struck with astonishment, as the Dutch had been, by the enormous statues erected on the shore. Cook says that the latitude of Easter Island answers very closely to that marked in Roggewein's manuscript journal, and its longitude is only 1 degree wrong. The shore, composed of black broken rock of ferruginous appearance, shows traces of violent subterranean eruption. A few scattered plantations were perceived in the centre of the island. Singular coincidence! The first word spoken by the natives as the strangers approached the shore was to ask in the Tahitan tongue for a rope. This again suggested that the origin of both races was the same. Like the Tahitans, they were tattooed and clothed in stuff similar to those of the Society Islands. The action of the sun on their heads, says the narrative, has forced them to find different means for protecting themselves. The greater number of men wear a circular head covering about 2 inches thick, twisted with grass from one side to the other, and covered with a great quantity of those long black feathers which adorn the frigate bird. Others have enormous hats of brown gulls' feathers, almost as large as the wigs of European lawyers, and many have a simple wooden hoop surrounded with white gulls' feathers, which wave in the air. The women wear large and wide hats of neat plaits, which come to a point in front, with a ridge along the top, and 2 great lobes on either side. The country was a picture of desolation. It was surveyed by 2 detachments, and was found to be covered with black and porous stones. The entire vegetation which could thrive on this mass of lava consisted of 2 or 3 kinds of rugose grass, which grew on the rocks, scanty bushes, especially the paper mulberry, the hibiscus, and the mimosa, and some plantains. Close to the landing place is a perpendicular wall, constructed of square stones, compactly and durably joined in accordance with art rules, and fitting in a style of durability. Further on, in the center of a well-paved area, a monolith is erected representing a half-naked human figure some 20 feet high and more than 5 wide, very roughly hewn. The head is badly designed, the eyes, nose, and mouth scarcely indicated, but the ears are very long, as is the fashion in this country, and are better finished than the rest. In the earlier editions of the French translation of Cook's Voyages, Paris, 1878, 7/4 volumes, the height of this statue is given as 2 feet, evidently by a typographical error. We now correct this mistake, which has been repeated in all subsequent editions. These monuments, which are numerous, do not appear to have been erected or hewn by the race the English found, or this race had degenerated, for these natives paid no respect to the statues, although they treated them with a certain veneration, and objected to any one's walking on the pavement near them. It was not only the seashore that these enormous sentinels were seen. Between the mountains and the fissures of rocks, others existed, some erect or fallen to earth through some convulsion, others still imperfectly separated from the block from which they were being cut. What sudden catastrophe stopped the works? What do these monoliths represent? To what distant period do these testimonies of the industry of a race long disappeared, or the recollection of whom has perished, seem to point? This problem must remain for ever insoluble. Traffic proceeded easily. It was only necessary to repress the marvellous dexterity of the natives in emptying pockets. The few possessions which had been obtained had been very useful, though the want of drinkable water prevented Cook remaining long in Easter Island. He directed his course to the archipelago of the Marquesas of Madonna, which had not been visited since 1595, but his vessel had no sooner been put to sea than he was again attacked by the bilious fever, from which he had suffered so severely. The sufferers from scurvy relapsed, and all who had undertaken long walks across Easter Island had their faces burnt by the sun. On the 7th of April, 1774, Cook sighted the Marquesas group, after seeking them in vain for 5 consecutive days in the different positions assigned to them by geographers. Anchor was cast at Tauwati, the Santa Cristina of Madonna. The Resolution was soon surrounded by pirogues, the foremost of which was full of stones, every man on board having a sling around his hand. However, friendly relations were formed, followed by barter. "These natives," says Forster, "are well made, with handsome faces, yellowish or tanned complexions, and marks all over their bodies, which gives them an almost black appearance. The valleys of our harbour were filled with trees, and tallied in every particular with the description given by the Spaniards. We saw fire across the forest several times, very far from the shore, and concluded that the country was well populated." The difficulty of procuring food decided Cook upon a hasty departure, but he had time to collect some interesting facts about the people, whom he considered the handsomest in Oceania. These natives appear to surpass all others in the regularity of their features. The resemblance in their speech, however, to that of the Tahitans, appears to point to a common origin. The Marquesas are 5 in number: Magdalena, San Pedro, Dominica, Santa Cristina, and Hood Island, the latter so called after the volunteer who first discovered it. Santa Cristina is divided by a chain of mountains of considerable elevation, to which the hills that rise from the sea lead. Deep, narrow, and fertile valleys, filled with fruit trees, and watered by streams of excellent water, intersect this mountain isle. Port Madre de Dios, called by Cook Resolution Harbour, is about the centre of the eastern coast of Santa Cristina. It contains 2 sandy creeks, into which 2 streams flow. End of section 17. Recording by Bob Rose. Section 18 of Celebrated Travels and Travelers, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Rose. Celebrated Travels and Travelers, Volume 2. Great Navigators of the 18th Century, by Jules Verne. First part, Chapter 4, Part 2. Captain Cook's Second Voyage, 2a. A fresh visit to Tahiti and the Friendly Islands. Exploration of New Hebrides. Discovery of New Caledonia and Pine Island. Stay in Queen Charlotte's Sound, South Georgia. Accident to the Adventure. After leaving these islands on the 12th of April and sailing for Tahiti, Cook fell in 5 days later with the Pomotou archipelago. He landed on the Tioukea island of Byron. The inhabitants, who had cause to complain of earlier navigators, received the advances of the English coldly. The latter could only obtain about 24 cocoanuts and 5 pigs, which appeared plentiful in this island. In another settlement, a more friendly reception was met with. The natives embraced the newcomers and rubbed their noses in the same fashion as the New Zealanders. Oedidi bought several dogs, the long and white hair of whose skins serves as an ornament for karosses in his native land. Forster relates, "The natives told us that they broke up scurvy grass, mixed it with shellfish, and threw it into the sea on the approach of a shoal of fish. This bait intoxicated the fish for a time, and when they came to the surface it was easy to take them." The captain afterwards saw several other islands of this immense archipelago, which were similar to those he had left, especially the Pernicious Islands, where Rajawine had lost his sloop, the African, and to which Cook gave the name of Palliser Islands. He then steered for Tahiti, which the sailors, certain of the goodwill of the natives, regarded as a home. The Resolution cast anchor in Matavai Bay on the 22nd of April, and their reception was as friendly as had been anticipated. A few days later, King Otoo and several other chiefs visited the English, and brought them a present of 10 or a dozen large pigs, and some fruit. Cook's first idea was to remain in the spot only just long enough for Mr. Wales, the astronomer, to take observations, but the abundance of provisions induced him to prolong his stay. On the morning of the 26th, the captain, who had been to Oparré with some of his officers to make a formal visit to the king, observed a fleet of more than 300 pirogues drawn up in order on the shore. They were all completely equipped. At the same time a number of warriors assembled on the beach. The officers' suspicions were excited by this formidable armament, collected in one night, but they were reassured by the welcome they received. This fleet consisted of no less than 60 large double pirogues, decorated with flags and streamers, and 170 smaller ones, intended for the transport of provisions, and the flotilla was manned with no fewer than 7,760 men, warriors or paddlers. "The sight of this fleet," says Forster, "increased our ideas of the power and wealth of the island. The entire crew was astonished. When we reflect upon the implements possessed by this people, we can but admire the patience and toil necessary to cut down these enormous trees, separate and polish the branches, and then to carry the heavy constructions to such perfection. These works are produced by them by means of a stone hatchet and saw, a piece of coral, and the hide of whales. The chiefs, and all who occupied a prominent fighting rank, were dressed in military style, that is to say, in a quantity of stuffs, turbans, helmets, and breastplates. The height of some of the helmets was most embarrassing to the wearers. The entire equipment appeared more appropriate for scenic effect than suitable for a battlefield. But, in any case, It added to the grandeur of the display, and the warriors did not fail to show themselves with a view to the most striking effect. Upon reaching Matavai, Cook learned that this formidable armament was destined for attack upon Eimeo, whose chief had revolted against the Tahitan yoke and become independent. During the following days the captain was visited by some of his old friends. All showed a desire to possess red feathers, which were of considerable value. One only attached more importance to a glass bead or a nail. The Tahitans were so impressed that they offered in exchange the strange mourning garments which they had refused to sell during Cook's first voyage. These garments are made of the rarest productions of the islands and the surrounding sea, and are worked with care and great skill, and no doubt are of great value to themselves. We bought no less than 10, which we brought to England. Oedidee, who had taken good care to procure some feathers for himself, could indulge in any caprice he liked. The natives looked upon him as a prodigy, and listened eagerly to his tales. The principal personages of the island, and even the king, sought his society. He married a daughter of the chief of Matavai, and brought his wife on board. Every one was delighted to make him a present. Finally he decided to remain at Tahiti, where he had found his sister married to a powerful chief. In spite of the thefts, which more than once caused unpleasantness, the English procured more provisions on their stay in this port than ever before. The aged Oberea, who was like a queen in the islands during the stay made by the Dauphin in 1767, herself brought pigs and fruits in the secret hope of obtaining red feathers, which had so great a success. Presents were liberally given, and the Indians were amused with fireworks and military manoeuvres. Just before he left, the captain witnessed a curious naval review. Otoo ordered a sham fight, but it lasted so short a time that it was impossible to observe the movements. The fleet was to commence hostilities 5 days after Cook's departure, and he would have much liked to have waited for it, but, fearing the natives might suspect him of an attempt to overcome both conquered and victors, he determined to leave. The Resolution had scarcely left the bay when one of the gunners, seduced by the delights of Tahiti, and possibly by the promises of King Otoo, who, no doubt, thought a European might be of use to him, threw himself into the sea, but he was soon retaken by a boat launched by Cook in his pursuit. Cook very much regretted the fact that discipline obliged him to act in this way. The man had no relations or friends in England, and, had he requested permission to remain in Tahiti, it would not have been refused. On the 15th, the Resolution anchored in Owera harbour, in Huaheine Island. The old chief Orea was one of the first to congratulate the English upon their return, and to bring them presents. The captain presented him with red feathers, but the old chief appeared to prefer iron, hatchets, and nails. He seemed more indolent than upon the previous visit. His head was weaker, no doubt owing to his immoderate love for an intoxicating drink extracted from pepper by the natives. His authority was evidently despised, and Cook sent in pursuit of a band of robbers who had not refrained from pillaging the old king himself, and who had taken refuge in the centre of the island. Orea showed himself grateful for the consideration the English had always shown him. He was the last to leave the vessel before she sailed, on the 24th of April, and, when Cook said that they should never meet again, he shed tears and replied, "Send your children here, we will treat them well." On another occasion, Orea asked the captain where he should be buried. "At Stepney," said Cook. Orea begged him to repeat the word until he could pronounce it. Then 100 voices cried at once, "Stepney Morai no Toot." Stepney, the grave of Cook. In giving this reply, the great navigator had no prevision of his fate, or of the difficulty his fellow countrymen would have in finding his remains. Oedidee, who at the last moment had accompanied the English to Huaheine, had not met with so cordial a welcome as at Tahiti. His riches had strangely diminished, and his credit suffered in consequence. The narrative says, "He soon proved the truth of the proverb that a man is never a prophet in his own country. He left us with regrets which proved his esteem for us, and when the moment of separation arrived, he ran from cabin to cabin, embracing every one." It is impossible to describe the mental anguish of the young man when he left. He gazed at the vessel, burst into tears, and crouching in despair in the bottom of his pirogue, we saw him again stretching out his arms to us as we left the reefs. Cook reconnoitred Hove Island, so called by Wallis, on the 6th of June. It is named Mohipa by the natives. A few days later he found several uninhabited islets surrounded by a chain of breakers, to which he gave the name Palmerston, in honour of one of the lords of the Admiralty. Upon the 20th, a steep and rocky island was discovered, crowned with large woods and bushes. The beach was narrow and sandy, and several natives of very dark complexion were seen upon it. They made menacing demonstrations, and were armed with lances and clubs. As soon as the English landed, they retired. Champions, however, advanced and endeavoured to provoke the strangers, assailing them with a storm of arrows and stones. Sparrman was wounded in the arm, and Cook just escaped being struck by a javelin. A general volley soon dispersed these inhospitable islanders, and the uncivil reception which was thus accorded well deserved the name bestowed upon their land of Savage Island. 4 days later Cook reached the Tonga archipelago once more. He stopped this time at Namuka, called Rotterdam by Tasman. He had scarcely cast anchor before the ship was surrounded by a crowd of pirogues, filled with bananas and every kind of fruit, which were exchanged for nails and old pieces of stuff. This friendly reception encouraged the naturalists to land and penetrate to the interior, in search of new plants and unknown productions. Upon their return they enlarged upon the beauty of this picturesque and romantic country, and upon the affability and cordiality of the natives. In spite of it, however, various thefts continued to take place, until a more important larceny than usual obliged the captain to resort to severity. A native, who opposed the seizure of 2 pirogues by the English, as hostages until the stolen arms were restored, was wounded severely by a gunshot. During this second visit Cook bestowed the name of Friendly Islands upon this group, no doubt with a sarcastic meaning. Nowadays they are better known by the native name of Tonga. The indefatigable navigator continued his route in a westward direction, passed in succession Lepreux, Aurora, Whitsunday, and Mallicolo Islands, to which archipelago Bougainville had given the name of the Grand Cyclades. Cook gave his usual order to enter into friendly and commercial relations with the inhabitants. The first day passed quietly, and the natives celebrated the visit of the English by games and dancing, but on the morrow an incident occurred which led to a general collision. A native, who was refused access to the ship, prepared to launch an arrow at one of the sailors. His fellow countrymen at first prevented him. At the same moment Cook appeared on deck, his gun in his hand. His first step was to shout to the native, who again aimed at the sailor. Without replying, the native was about to let his arrow fly at him, when a shot anticipated and wounded him. This was the signal for a general discharge of arrows, which struck on the vessel and did but little damage. Cook then ordered a gun to be fired over the natives' heads, with a view to dispersing them. A few hours later the natives again surrounded the ship, and returned to their barter as if nothing had happened. Cook took advantage of these friendly indications to land an armed detachment for wood and water. 4 or 5 natives were collected on the beach. A chief, leaving the group, advanced to the captain, holding in his hand, as Cook also did, a green bough. The two branches were exchanged, and peace thus concluded. A few slight presents helped to cement it. Cook then obtained permission to take wood, but not to go far from the shore, and the naturalists, who were anxious to prosecute their investigations in the interior, were brought back to the beach, in spite of their protestations. Iron implements had no value for these people. This made it extremely difficult to obtain provisions. Only a few agreed to exchange arms for stuffs, and exhibited an honesty in their transactions to which the English were unaccustomed. The exchanges continued after the Resolution had set sail, and the natives hurried in their pirogues to deliver the articles for which they had received the price. One of them, after vigorous efforts, succeeded in gaining the vessels, carrying his weapons to a sailor who had paid for them and forgotten it, it was so long ago. The native refused the recompense the sailor would have given, making him understand that he had been paid already. Cook gave the name of Port Sandwich to this harbour of refuge, which he left on the morning of the 23rd of July. He was most favourably impressed by the moral qualities of the natives of Mallicolo, but by no means in regard to their physical powers. Small and badly proportioned, bronze in colour, with flat faces, they were hideous. Had Darwinian theories been in vogue in those days, no doubt Cook would have recognized in them that missing link between man and monkey, which is the despair of Darwin's followers. Their coarse, crinkly black hair was short, and their bushy beards did not add to their beauty. But the one thing which made them most grotesque was their habit of tying a cord tightly across the stomach, which made them appear like great emmets. Tortoiseshell earrings, bracelets made of hogs' teeth, large tortoiseshell rings, and a white flat stone which they passed through the cartilage of their nose, constituted their ornaments. Their weapons were bows and arrows, spears and clubs. The points of their arrows, which were occasionally 2 or 3 in number, were coated with the substance which the English thought was poisonous, from observing the care which the natives drew them out of a kind of quiver. The Resolution had only just left Port Sandwich, when all the crew were seized with colic, vomiting, and violent pains in the head and back. 2 large fish had been caught and eaten by them, possibly whilst they were under the influence of the narcotic mentioned above. In every case 10 days elapsed before entire recovery. A parrot and a dog which had also eaten of the fish died next day. Quiros' companions had suffered in the same way, and since Cook's voyage similar symptoms of poisoning have been noticed in these latitudes. After leaving Mallicolo, Cook steered for Ambrim Island, which appeared to contain a volcano, and shortly afterwards discovered a group of small islands, which he named Shepherd Islands, in honour of the Cambridge professor of astronomy. He then visited the islands of Two Hills, Montague, Hinchinbrook Islands, and the largest of all, Sandwich Island, which must not be mistaken for the group of the same name. All the islands, lying among and protected by breakers, were covered with rich vegetation, and were largely populated. 2 slight accidents interrupted the calm on board. A fire broke out, which was soon extinguished, and one of the sailors falling overboard was at once rescued. Coromango was discovered on the 3rd of August. The next day Cook reached its shore, hoping to find a watering place and facility for landing. The greater part of the sufferers from the poisonous fish had not yet recovered their health, and they looked forward to its speedy re-establishment on shore. But the reception accorded to them by the natives, who were armed with clubs, lances, and arrows, seemed wanting in sincerity. Cook was on his guard. Finding that they could not lure the English into landing, the natives endeavoured to force them. A chief and several men tried to snatch the oars from the sailors. Cook wished to fire his musket, but the priming would not go off. The English were immediately overwhelmed with stones and arrows. The captain at once ordered a general volley. Fortunately, half of the shots missed, or the slaughter would have been terrific. Forster says, "These natives appear to be of different race to those living in Mallicolo. They speak a different language. They are of medium height, but well shaped, and their features are not disagreeable. They were bronze in complexion, and they paint their faces black or red. Their hair is somewhat woolly and curly. The few women I saw appeared very ugly. I have seen no pirogues on any part of the coast. They live in houses covered with palm leaves, and their plantations are in straight lines and are surrounded by a hedge of reeds." It was useless to make a second attempt to land. Cook, having bestowed the name of Cape Traitor upon the scene of the collision, reached an island which he had seen the previous evening, and which the natives called Tana. "The highest hill of the same range is of conical shape," says Forster, "with a crater in the centre. It is reddish brown, and composed of a mass of burnt stones, perfectly sterile. From time to time it emitted a thick column of smoke like a great tree, increasing in width as it ascended. The Resolution was at once surrounded by a score of pirogues, the largest of which contained 25 men. The latter sought to appropriate everything within their reach, buoys, flags, the hinges of the rudder, which they tried to knock off. They only returned to the shore after a 4-pounder had been fired over their heads. The vessel made for the shore, but all the trifles that were distributed could not induce the natives to relinquish their attitude of defiance and bravado. It was clear that the smallest misunderstanding would lead to bloodshed. Cook imagined these people to be cannibals, although pigs, fowls, roots, and fruits abounded. During the stay, prudence prevented any one leaving the shore. Forster, however, ventured a little way and discovered a spring of water, so hot that he could not hold his finger in it longer than a second. In spite of all their wishes, the English found it impossible to reach the central volcano, which emitted torrents of fire and smoke as high as the clouds, and projected enormously large stones into the air. The number of extinct volcanoes in every direction was considerable, and the soil was decidedly subject to volcanic eruptions. By degrees, though without losing their reserve, the Tanians became more at home with the strangers, and intercourse was less difficult. "These people," says Cook, "showed themselves hospitable, civil, and good-hearted, when we did not excite their jealousy. We cannot blame their conduct greatly, for after all, from what point of view can they have judged us? They could not possibly know our real intentions. We entered their country, as they dared not oppose us. We endeavoured to disembark as friends, but we landed and maintained our superiority by force of arms. Under such circumstances, what opinion could the natives form of us? It doubtless appeared far more plausible that we came to invade their country, than that which we visited them as friends. Time only and intimate relations could teach them our good intentions." However that might be, the English were at a loss to guess why the natives prevented their penetrating to the interior of the country. Was it owing to a naturally shy nature, or possibly because they were threatened with constant inroads from their neighbours? Their address in the use of arms, and their bearing supported this idea, but it was impossible to know with any certainty. As the natives did not value anything the English offered, they did not bring any great quantity of fruits and roots the latter longed for. They would not consent to part with their pigs, even for hatchets, the utility of which they had proved. The productions of the island included breadfruits, cocoa nuts, a fruit like a peach called pare, yams, potatoes, wild pigs, nutmegs, and many others of which Forster did not know the names. Section 19. Recording by Bob Rose.